Next, we'll go to Deepanshu Mohan from Jindal Global University.
Hi, this is wonderful. I'll get started right away, just with a few minutes in hand. I'm here to talk a little bit about a methodological and a pedagogical experiment that we've sort of got into over the last couple of years. My training is an economic historian, but I've been working on issues around development studies for a while. And what we've been trying to do is inculcate or incubate a culture of trying to visually use anthropological tools to archive the field work that we have been doing. Now, which touches upon areas of migration and mobility studies, but what we've been largely doing is been trying to narrativize livelihoods of what we call as floating worker populations, largely those working in the informal, unorganized sector, different communities, and I'll come to which communities we have specifically worked on. But the effort has been largely as a concentrated objective has been to study the invisibilization of work amongst vulnerable groups over a period of time. Now, what is the conceptual sort of contribution that we're trying to aim at is to develop what would be considered as an inclusive framework to understanding issues around urban informality, but they're not concentrated only to urban areas. As Rachel pointed out earlier, there's a triangulated geography of rural, semi-urban, urban areas where you're looking at people moving from across these areas. So what Visual Storyboard does is that we produce what you would consider as different photo, video essays to try bringing out narratives and communications of the voices of respondents, rather than not just restrict to research papers or journal articles, which is as important as they are, sometimes do not change the lives of the communities we are engaging with. These are some of the research questions I put out there, but as the presentation will be shared, I think you'll get a deeper insight on the kind of interventions we've been trying to look at. We've very closely worked on Carl Polanyi's concept of embeddedness and tried to study it in context to craft, ethnic participation of the role of sociocultural profile of communities and their economic livelihood. But in the questions around migration, we're trying to look at motivations that make communities mobile. Why are men and women and different members of other gendered group communities moving so often as they are? And despite the pandemic, which caused a huge crisis back in India, which has a largely informal workforce, how has this affected their own lives and livelihoods? We're also looking at questions of intra-household gender relations for identified communities, and there's a lot of work that has come out, which has been published now, that one can get a sense. What I've tried to do is just give you a very quick snapshot of a few studies we've recently completed. And the idea, as I said, was initially to just document and get a sense of what these communities are experiencing with a basic insight into their intra and inter-household circumstances. But the axes of research that have emerged from the work that we did have given us an idea about looking at issues of deunionization, asymmetric gendered power relations, and weakening worker agency. Now, all of this may be a core center in the field of development economics, but when you look at the intersectionality and the application of that, I think there's a lot of scope to be done. This is just to give you a sense of a community we work with. This is a 500,000 migrant worker based, located at the Delhi-Gurgaon border in the north, the capital of India. Largely uncovered. There's hardly any research that has been done there because it's a very difficult area to navigate. The communities there are staying in sort of subhuman conditions, but have created their own informal solidarity networks and have tried to make a living over a period of time. There are issues of housing, rental arrangements that we've tried to study. We're still doing that. It takes a while, but last 2 years we've been trying to work in this area. There are a lot of issues around class, access to basic amenities, which we have figured that are closely concentrated with where you work and where is that where people stay. And this has a lot to do where, in terms of gendered power relations, access to drinking water and sanitation facilities is an important factor. So just some images that will give you a sense of the nature of work. These are water meters. So there's no state presence of providing access to water as close as to the national capital region. This was a study which focused on daily wage workers. And I very quickly want to scan through some of the images where we are looking at the role and relevance of informal labor markets, places where workers travel 4 hours a day in the morning, and they try to look for a job largely in the construction area on an ad hoc informal contract on a daily wage. Most of them are largely men, but there are stories of women that we've tried to articulate in the video essays that have come out. Particularly, this issue was important in COVID, the pandemic-induced lockdown. India had the largest, most severe form of lockdown, and it's regressed these communities back by almost a decade. And I'm understating the claim right here. A lot of work that we've quantified now have tried to sort of bring out some of these facts. Children, women have definitely been affected, but if you look at nomadic communities, those working in the circus, hand-cut steel workers, we've looked at all of these communities over a period of time. Finally, the degrees of embeddedness of craft with the way in which textile workers operate, those we may brand and commercialize in export houses, but the tragedy is of the workers who are engaged in the craft and the sort of desperate situations that they've been working in. So we've tried to look at different kinds of craft substance, largely in the state of Rajasthan, within Jaipur. Most of this craft is largely produced by women and has almost 85% of household women working in producing the craft. Finally, just the communities we have been working on, from street vendors to sex workers in red light districts to ethnic minorities. Dr. Chang's presentation was fascinating because we worked with the Cham community in Cambodia, which is also an area that we've tried to collaborate our work. Issue is funding. Resources is a big problem, but we've tried to sort of do some pilot studies in those areas. There were right-affected victims whose testimonies we also got, which closely brought out into the issues of migration over a period of time. Finally, just to tell, for those who are attending this deliberation, we're very keen to build collaborative partnerships. We want to develop more cross-border case studies. We have an exceptionally dedicated team of students. This is largely student-led initiative, has very few faculty members involved, but it's students not just from one university, around 5 or 6 universities that we have represented, and they're working on this. So with that, I'll close. Thank you.